All right, good morning. Welcome to the webinar, ARMOR VCI in Action, Customer Success Stories. So I'm Kristen Moore. I am a project manager here at ARMOR Protective Packaging, and it's my voice that you're going to hear for the next 30 minutes. And my co-host today is one of our eradicators of rust, Jeff. He's going to be manning that question box. So anytime throughout the webinar, if you have a question on the presentation, just feel free to type it right into that box we practiced, and Jeff will get you an answer. So for some of you on this webinar, you are very familiar with ARMOR, but for others, you might need a little introduction or reintroduction to ARMOR. So at ARMOR, while we manufacture a rust prevention and rust removal product, we know that our purpose is to protect your brand, your customer's brand, your parts, your customer's parts, and most importantly, your reputation. And how we do it? Well, it's listed right there in that first bullet point. It's VCI technology. It's vapor corrosion inhibiting nanotechnology. Sometimes you'll hear me refer to it as VCI. Sometimes you'll hear me refer to it as rust prevention. We also have that rust remover product that I mentioned, which is Metal Rescue Rust Remover Bath, and that's located in over 9,000 retail locations like Home Depot and AutoZone and Canadian Tire. But what you might find most interesting is that third bullet point on the bottom of your screen, which is over 90% of Fortune 500 companies, well, they rely on ARMOR products. So now that you know a little bit about Jeff and I and ARMOR, here's how we're going to break down the webinar today. We're going to spend a few minutes doing a little bit of identification and diagnosing rust. Then we're going to talk for just a few minutes again about, well, what is VCI and how do you use it to prevent rust? And then the bulk of our conversation today is that last bullet point, which are ARMOR VCI in Action Customer Success Stories. So if you've been on an ARMOR webinar before, you know these first few slides. So it's just a little corrosion basic reminder for you, a refresher. And if this is your first ARMOR webinar, well, welcome. And in order for rust to happen, you need these three things. You need metal, you need air, and you need moisture. Now, I'm not going to get too deep when it comes to the forms of corrosion or what I like to call the colors of corrosion. I'm just going to walk through 4 different colors to give you a little bit more information and knowledge about rust. So the first type of rust that you see on your screen is red rust. Red rust is the most common type of rust that's out there. That's the type of rust you see on a car. That's the type of rust that you see on metal that's laying out in the field. Because in order to have red rust, metal is exposed to a high amount of oxygen and water. Now, sometimes you might see, or your customers might come to you and say, oh, we have a lot of brown rust. Now, if you see brown rust on parts, I want you to think of contamination. Usually when we see brown rust, it's either fingerprints or it's part washers or coolant solutions gone bad. Now, you or your customers might say, we're seeing a lot of what looks like black rust. And when you have black rust, what's happening is the metal's exposed to air, but a low amount of oxygen. So you normally get black rust when you either have wet paper or maybe wet poly that does not have VCI in it, resting tightly against metal. And then the last form of corrosion is that yellow or yellowish orange rust. And that yellowish orange rust kind of tells you what's going on by the way it looks, because it looks like that rust is dripping down the side of that metal part. So if you're experiencing a lot of yellow or orange rust, you have high moisture content or moisture near your metal. So you usually have one of two things going on. You've got metal that's near standing water, or more commonly, you have parts that are washed but not fully dried before they're packaged. And that's how technical we're going to get this morning in terms of diagnosing rust. But if you have a specific rust question or a technical question on the colors of rust, feel free to type that in the question box to Jeff and he'll get an answer for you. Now, when it comes to rust prevention, there are multiple ways to prevent rust. You can use paint and coatings, you can use oil, you can use grease. But the one in particular that we're talking about today is VCI packaging. And for those of you who need a refresher to understand, well, what exactly is VCI? This image describes it pretty clearly. In order for VCI, that's right in the middle. It's vapor corrosion inhibiting nanotechnology. And for it to work, you need what we call a carrier. So on the left-hand side of your screen, there's craft paper. That craft paper is impregnated or coated with VCI. And then you have what's on the right-hand side of your screen, which is a rust preventative wrap. You can put your metal parts right into that ARMOR wrap and it prevents it from rusting. So here I've switched out the carrier from craft paper to poly, and that poly is extruded with VCI. Same thing, you put your metal part right into that poly bag, you close it up, and you have a protective barrier on your metal that keeps out that moisture and oxygen and contamination that we talked about earlier. So the picture right now on your screen I love because it really explains VCI. Those little white dots that you're looking at, those represent VCI. And VCI is volatile, which just means that it wants to leave the carrier that it's in, it wants to leave that poly, and it's attracted to the metal. And it puts a barrier on that metal that keeps out the moisture and the contaminants and the oxygen. Now you might be asking yourself, well, how thick is that barrier? We are talking nanotechnology. So if you look at the left-hand side of your screen, ARMOR VCI is 4 to 6 nanometers thick. Compare that to a single sheet of paper that's 100,000 nanometers thick. You can see that's how clean and easy it is to use VCI. So that's a lot of build up to the reason why you are here, to get right down into our success stories, or what we like to call our Rustimonials. So we're going to walk through these 5 different stories. And the first one is Cummins engine plant. And what's cool about this is the project that really kicked off our close relationship with Cummins. But the story is even more than just sales dollars. ARMOR shaped the way Cummins views rust prevention, and their quality team has included a new guideline, and I quote, to get rid of RP oils whenever and wherever possible. So how'd this happen? Here's the before. So here's what Cummins was doing before. And for all these Rustimonials, we're going to walk through the before and then the after. So in the before, the picture on your screen, what you're looking at right in the middle of your screen are 2 engine heads. And you can see in that photo, they would use 2 competitor bags, 1 for each head. And then while their spec included add 2 foam emitters, we found out they were actually adding a total of 4 foam emitters. But if that doesn't sound like enough product, they would add 4 squirts of Rust Tech to the bottom of the bag and then 4 squirts of Rust Tech to the top of the bag before they sealed it up. So if you aren't familiar with what Rust Tech is, it's a pretty harsh rust preventative oil, or what you'll hear people refer to as an RP oil. And you might actually be shocked about how many companies still use RP oils because it's the old traditional way to prevent rust. But we know now how harsh they are, how messy they are, and how they aren't the best rust prevention form. So now they would take the 2 bags. They would have the squirts of oil in them. They would have the foam emitters in them. And then they would set those bags down on a wood pallet. And then they'd have to deal with, sometimes the heads would tear those corners of the competitor bags because they just had sharp corners. So then you've got this wood pallet, 2 bags, sometimes have a tear in it with RP oil in them, foam emitters. Now we all know that's the before. And this is where ARMOR came in. So our sales team said, you've got to start sampling and testing ARMOR products. And as a side note, that's part of our sales cycle. We are liberal with our sample program because we want you to identify your rust issue and trial the product, and we want you to let us propose that better solution. So if you are in need of samples for a project you're working on, just type that in the question box to Jeff, and he will get you connected with the right individual and the right team that can provide you samples. So we believed with Cummins there was a much better way to prevent rust than what they were doing, and a solution that did not involve any RP oil. So here's what we did first. You can look at the picture on the screen. We recommend just use 1 bag that you can set right on the pallet. So you have that 1 bag right on the pallet. And then we recommend, before you put the product or the parts in, use 1 layer of ARMOR wrap on the bottom of the bag, and then use 1 layer of ARMOR wrap on the top of the bag. So using ARMOR wrap, which is that craft paper that's impregnated with VCI, it provides 2 different things. 1, it provides that extra VCI protection in packaging. But 2, for this project, it added a barrier to prevent those sharp edges from ever tearing any poly bag. So it meant that CUMMINS could just simply remove that step of using RP oils, remove the step of using foam emitters, and the individuals in the plant who were then receiving the item didn't have to worry about any messy, sticky RP oil on those engine heads when they would arrive. So you've got that final solution, which is 1 bag, 1 piece of armor wrap, engine head, 1 piece of armor wrap on the top, and then it was closed up. So in this example, we used a 6 mil poly bag to start. And that's because we wanted to be able to show what's on the very bottom of your screen right now, which was the annual cost savings for rust prevention. So we wanted to use an apples-to-apples comparison of what they were traditionally using. So this is where technically the Rustimonial would end, and this is the after result. There was a 30% reduction in labor, the 12% savings in material costs, but I wanted to add on one more slide to this Rustimonial, which is about a year into this project, we said to CUMMINS, you know, we have this Defender bag. And because in the beginning I mentioned their old bags were 6 mil, we wanted to make apples to apples comparison, we also suggested a 6 mil bag. But as they saw the success of this new process in removing RP oils, they were open to learning more about Armor's Defender film. Now, I'm not going to go into today about what's the difference between a VCI monofilm and a Defender film, but what I do want you to say is if you've never heard of this Defender film, or you want to learn more about what is this Defender film, which is used 25% less material and has these 3 unique layers, then just type that in the box to Jeff and say, hey, send me some information on Defender. And that was the Rustimonial for CUMMINS. And for any of these Rustimonials, if you want a physical copy of the actual Rustimonial sent to you, just let Jeff know. So if you want CUMMINS Rustimonial, just type that in the question box and Jeff will send it over to you. So up next is Tremic, and this is a good story. So I want you to imagine sitting around a conference table and you hear from your boss that your bonus is being used to buy a rust remover. That would be a little surprising and a little bit of a wake-up call. Well, that's exactly what happened at Tremic. So how in the world did one company stop spending money trying to remove rust by having it not happen in the first place? And I'm going to say for this Rustimonial, a lot of hard work, some tough conversations, and as Tremic likes to say, a pretty great partnership with Armor and Armor products. So here we go. Here's the before. And to understand what was happening, you got to know a little bit of the backstory with Tremic. So we'll call this plant QRO in Mexico. And this plant was making transmission components. And then before, they were building with them right away in their own plant. So they weren't really experiencing any rust issues. But now they needed to ship those parts all the way up to Michigan. And when those parts would arrive in Michigan, you can see the photos on your screen. They were rusty and they were covered in an RP oil and what our customers said looked to them like a sandwich bag. And that's where that time and money I alluded to earlier, well, it was spent fixing or derusting those parts. And that's an expensive problem that can be fixed not only using the right rust prevention, but also using the right knowledge that Armor provides about how rust is formed. So something was going on before we even get into the rust prevention packaging itself. The parts washer solution in the Mexico plant was bad. And if you've ever been on the Armor webinar titled 15 Reasons Why Parts Rust During Shipping and Storage, you know that part washer solutions that have gone bad, or basically their pH is not correct, well, they can cause rust. So it took about 6 or 8 months to truly implement what Armor was recommending at the plant level, which was use deionized water. After they started using deionized water, it kicked off what our customer quoted as their internal process, which means we need to clean metal right, we need to handle it right, and we need to ship it right. So then they did get a hold on, okay, how do you clean it right and how do you handle it right? Make sure you use the proper gloves. And then that led to, well, how do you ship it right? And Armor implemented the use of many Armor products for them to ship. Well, what you're looking at is ARMOR Poly, but they also included ARMOR Wrap, desiccant, and dry coat rust preventative spray in their process. So they at Tremec, looking at just the rust prevention, said that they had a $60,000 a year annual savings in just rust prevention or rust removal costs. And again, if there's a little bonus, just like there was a bonus at CUMMINS, there was a little bonus because through this process, then they also were able to reach out to their inbound suppliers, their other groups that they worked with, and share what they learned about using deionized water, and then what they learned about using ARMOR products. So if this is a Rustimonial that you want sent to you, this is a picture of it in a physical form or electronic form, just let Jeff know and he will get it sent over to you. All right, so the third one that we're going to talk about is Continental. So for the story Continental, go ahead right now on your screen and look at the upper right corner. Continental was using a competitor VCI bag and a desiccant. Now, if you look at the left side, it's pretty obvious it wasn't working and the plant was having rust issues and there was really no getting around it. So our international sales manager, Fernando, developed a relationship with their packaging engineers. And when the packaging engineer sent Fernando the photo you're looking at, he instantly knew that it was brown rust, and it meant that some part was still getting exposed to the environment. So he arranged a training with Continental to talk about the different types of rust and talk about things that they could do based off the color of rust that they were seeing on the part. So Fernando tells a story that he went into the plant and the plant manager was only going to just stop in and say hi. And he ended up sitting through a 4-hour training on rust. And just as a side note, if training for the individuals in the field who are working with the metal day in and day out is something that you want, just type training in that box to Jeff and he will get you connected with the right team to set up some training for hourly employees. So in this example, Continental knew they needed something and ARMOR knew what they needed to do. We knew that they needed to use ARMOR Wrap, which you can see in the photo. But ARMOR Wrap is made from craft paper, and sometimes, and it was in this situation, there's a concern with using paper because of fibers. So ARMOR's solution was poly-coated 30G paper, and that's actually what you're looking at. Then you don't see it in this picture, but the final step before these parts were shipped were then to wrap them in stretch film to make a nice enclosed space for that VCI to work in. And at ARMOR, we also have stretch film that also has VCI impregnated into it. So again, we have this ARMOR Wrap, which was poly-coated. You can see the PC in the part number. ARMOR then passed their salt and fog humidity test, passed their ship test. And when you put this entire project together, we had an annual cost savings of over $1 million in both rust preventative packaging and not having to remove rust from those parts. So if this again is a Rustimonial that you want sent to you in a physical copy or electronic version, just type Continental in the box to Jeff and he'll get it sent over to you. All right, so the next one that we're going to talk about is GKN. So what was going on with GKN? Well, it is pretty straightforward. And what I want you to remember from GKN is this one sentence. Not all VCI is the same. If you have ever been on our All the Dirt webinar, you've heard us say this analogy, which is, I'm about to buy a used car, and I call up the used car dealer, and I say to the person on the other end of the phone, I need a used car, and they say back to me, great, I've got this car, and I just put new tires on it. And I think, perfect. I go down, and I buy the car, and I drive off, and about 7,000 or 8,000 miles later, those tire treads are shot. And in that moment, I realized, oh, there is a difference between generic tires and a good pair of tires, like Michelin brand. And the same is true about VCI. Not all VCI is the same. And in this case, the only thing that we did was start using ARMOR's bags instead of a competitor bag. And this is a picture that was sent to one of our technical sales manager, which I have to say is a pretty great picture to receive. So the only thing that GKN did was switch from using a generic version of VCI to ARMOR VCI. And if you want this Rustimonial and these images sent to you, then feel free just to type that in the box to Jeff and he will get it sent on over to you. And then this Rustimonial is Global Pump Company. So with Global Pump Company, we have before and after. So here's what Global was doing. You got to look really close into those clear bags on that picture. If you can see in there, it's kind of like gooey looking. What it is, it's that gross, horrible for the environment, messy for your facility, messy for your employees, rust preventative spray. And for those of you who've been on the green webinar, you've heard me talk about the start of VCI. And if you don't know this, it's a pretty little interesting tidbit. During World War II, the U.S. government wanted to be able to ship metal and guns overseas without them rusting. But they also wanted the guys in the field to be able to work with that metal right away and not have them covered with an RP oil. And from that need, VCI was invented. And this is the same thing like for your plant. So while a little less dramatic than war, nonetheless, we want clean, safe, and easy way for your teams to be able to work with metal right away and not have metal that's covered in that messy RP oil. And that's what happened. It's easy. It was just a switch from, instead of using RP oils, using VCI packaging on your metal parts to protect your metal parts from rusting. And in this case, the customer ended up using a CRUSADER bag with UV storage. That's what the option was at the time. Now we also have C-film, which is a great option for outdoor storage. If you'd like to learn more about our C-film, then just type outdoor storage in the box to Jeff and he'll send you some information in that. They also switched to those Defender bags that we talked about earlier, which are our co-extruded bags. They use 25% less material, and they also only put VCI on the inside of the bag next to the metal. They also had labor savings, oil elimination, and they used Metal Rescue Rust Remover bath for any time that they would need clean, safe, and easy rust removal for parts that were received at their facility that weren't packaged in VCI. And this provided them an annual cost savings of over $65,000 in rust prevention packaging. And again, if you want this Rustimonial sent to you, just send it on over to Jeff in that question box and say, hey, send me the Rustimonial on Global Pump Company, and he'll get it sent over to you. And then the last one to talk about today, and I saved this Rustimonial for the end because in most stories, and all the ones that I mentioned today, we always say, we saved this customer this amount of money on rust prevention. So we naturally think, okay, their rust solutions always cost less than what they were doing before. But in this case, it's not the case. The rust prevention solution itself actually cost more, but the total cost savings to the customer was way less. So here's what was happening before. For Volvo, they had 3 different engine sizes that they wanted to cover. And for those 3 different engines, they would only use 1 poly bag. So there was a constant rust issue on bottom of the 2 different bags because the engine head would stick out of the bag. So with ARMOR's knowledge of VCI, which we know that VCI works best in an enclosed space, ARMOR created what you're looking at, which is a bonnet, or I like to think of it as a shower cap. So Volvo was still able to just use 1 SKU for their VCI solution, but this bonnet fit and the elastic gave enough stretch to fit over all 3 of the engines. And then if you can see on this after, we don't have that red line across the bottom that says we had X amount of cost savings because in the end, their VCI solution from ARMOR cost more, but as a company, their total cost and time savings, and we know the saying, time is money, went down because they had a true rust prevention solution for all 3 of those engines. And then this one had a little bonus as well. Volvo was taking the idea of this bonnet and they're using it now on their turbo hold parts as well, which is great. So if you would like this Rustimonial sent over to you, then feel free just to type that in the box to Jeff. So at this moment, last slide I have for you. You've heard me mention a few different of our products, but again, going back to what I talked about on how VCI works, you just need a carrier for VCI. So I want to point out in this picture, before I turn it over to Jeff for questions, there are multiple forms of carriers for VCI. Everything from stretch film to craft paper to foam. We even have a liquid form, which is dry coat rust preventative spray. So if you'd like to learn any more about these family of products, then feel free just to type that in the box to Jeff. And at this point, what I'll do is turn it over to him to answer some of the questions in these last few minutes that I've seen come through on this webinar and on other webinars. So take it away, Jeff.
Thank you so much, Kristen. So a few things that I'll cover real quick that we see on a ton of webinars. I get a lot of questions, very basic, but where do I look for opportunities for VCI? I get that one repeatedly from people that want to sell VCI, or they sell a little bit of VCI, but they don't do a lot. And my most common answer is any plant making metal parts will use some kind of rust preventative. Now, they may paint the parts, they may use oil and grease or some other RP preventative solution, but anytime they're not painting a part, VCI is a great substitute to stop rust and corrosion. So the answer is simple. Any plant making metal parts can benefit from VCI to stop rust and corrosion. So when you're in a plant, what do you look for? You look for a packaging station or any kind of shipping area where they're packaging parts or packing parts for shipment. And then the most common thing I'll look for is the blue color, because that is the basic color of VCI for some reason. So always look for blue poly when you're in a plant. That's your number one indicator that VCI is going to be around. And then from there, you can start the conversation and move into targeting that business. So that's a biggie I always get. The next one we've been seeing just a flurry of questions about lately is, do we have any options for outdoor storage when it comes to poly? And the answer is yes. We have a film that is called C-film. C-film was designed for outdoor storage. We have a thinner, which is not quite as long of the outdoor storage, and then a more of a robust outdoor storage option in the C-film. But what it is, it's a co-extruded film. The inside layer is actually black, and that's where the VCI is held. So all the VCI is shuffled inside to the metal part. The outside layer is a white layer, and that has UVI protection in it, so it keeps it from breaking down when it's going to be stored outside. In both of these layers, we actually have shrink added, so you can shrink it down over the parts, and it is a fantastic option for short, medium, not quite years outside, but short and medium solutions when it comes to terms to protect your metal parts outside. So it will work very well. We're selling an absolute ton of it right now, and it is a huge hit. So if you're looking for outdoor storage for your metal parts with VCI that has UVI, shrink, rust protection in it, talk to us about our C-film and see if it could be a solution.
Thanks, Jeff. So again, from myself and from Jeff, thank you and have a wonderful rest of your day.